I think for me, the first will be commitment of state parties, member states of the Africa Union who all ratified the Charter on Human and People's Rights on the continent. And I'm sure you're very well aware that of the 55 state parties of the member states of the AU, only Morocco is yet to ratify the Charter. And given the length of time that the Commission has existed to superintend the promotion and protection of the rights enshrined in the Charter, and the amount of effort, and dedication, diligence, and commitment that all various stakeholders, including in some regard even the member states, put into attending sessions of the Commission, engaging with the Commission and its systems, in the course of trying to advance rights protection on the continent, one would have hoped that state parties to the Charter would be so much more committed, because this is an institution that they set up themselves, voluntarily. Nobody put them under extreme pressure to do that. And seeing the positive work and contributions that the Commission has made towards right promotion and protection, or even providing a forum where there is deliberation across board by all stakeholders on some of these issues, on the soil of the continent, and we can have frank conversations. One would have expected that at the very minimum, the member states will be committed to implementing the recommendations that come out of the Commission's reports. As you would have observed if you were at the session, you would have heard comments about some state parties not even submitting their statutory reports, which is quite sad. Some of them have never submitted at all, and that speaks volumes of what their assessment or what their estimation of the Commission is, which should actually not be the case. And then also implementing the recommendations of the Commission in its protective mandate, also leaves quite a lot to be desired, So, and then also basically capacitating the Commission to be able to deliver on its mandate by way of ensuring adequate staffing, human and material resources, and whatever else it needs to work effectively. Certainly all of these constitute challenges, to the promotion and protection of human rights on the continent. We can't be dealing with human rights on an ad hoc basis. It's got to be institutionalized, structured, and in a way that is engaging. And so when institutions that are supposed to do this come under pushback, both structurally and otherwise, and negative advocacy by states, then you actually ask yourself, what is the future, for human rights promotion and protection? And last but not the least, when you look at all the conflicts, that also are ongoing on the continent, and then some of the actions and activities of our state parties, whether you're talking about Cameroon, whether you're talking about Tanzania, and just as examples, and whether you're talking about what had transpired more recently in Burundi, and some of the challenges even in North African states, whether you're looking at Libya or you're looking at Egypt, it tells you that there's still a lot of work to do, and then it calls to question how you actually balance the state party commitments to the obligations they took on when they ratified the Charter. Or when you even look at Guinea, where there are efforts by the current leadership to introduce a third term, amend constitutionally guaranteed term limits, you start asking yourself the question, are we really making progress, or are we taking steps back? Three, in the context of the existing architecture, of course, there is need to ensure that the existing institutions are better resourced, because that is a key requirement for them to even be able to live up to the mandate that they currently have, including, for example, the Commission, which I get a sense is the main subject of your interview here. There are challenges, and these challenges have been on for many years in terms of just ensuring that, given the volume of work that the Commission currently has, including its communications docket, there's a need to ensure that they have enough human capacity and human resources to be able to deal with a lot of that, because you hear people complain, and rightly so, that it's also not proper for people to bring communications looking at alleging grievous human rights violations. And some of those communications take upwards of 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get decided on the merits, and these are things that in some instances are supposed to also be time bound, and sometimes by the time some of those decisions come through, maybe even the appellants or the litigants are late, or they are in irreversible situations in terms of where their rights violations would have been by that time. So that certainly cannot be right and needs to be addressed one way or the other, and whatever reform initiatives need to be done to get that to happen needs to happen. But on the flip side as well is also, even in the cases where some of those decisions are handed down, implementation of some of those judgments, what is the level of support that member states give towards ensuring that they comply with the decisions of the commission or the court in depending on the context. In some of those situations. So you find applicants being placed in a position of double jeopardy. Not only do some of this casework or communications take such a long time beyond what should ordinarily be allowable given what is the subject of the communication, but even when some of the judgments are handed down, then implementation sometimes never really happens or takes forever to happen. So, and that then calls to question the viability of the system, and then also its credibility, and then also the faith that the African population places in it as well, which is not something that is deliberate, but just where the commission finds itself. So those are issues that also need to be addressed and addressed effectively. And last but not the least is the need to also strengthen the very fabric of participatory democracy, which you find the populace demanding their rights to ensure that they elect leaders that are progressive. And then a growing incidence of, even though we've transited from an era of military rule and coup plotting to one of popular participation and democracy, but you still find a resistance by the political leadership to just play by the rules, and also ensure that the voice of the people and the will of the people prevails at the end of the day. So all of this certainly have implications for human rights promotion and protection. And when you recall, in the context of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, and all the very commendable provisions that are contained therein, and you see and you juxtapose it with the reality on the ground of the continent, you start asking yourself, when state parties develop these instruments and ratify them, are they sleeping? Do they believe in them? Or are they just trying to tick the box, and do some PRO kind of engagement? One is hoping that things would improve, and that member states would would see the need, again, out of a self-interest, to actually ensure that the will of the people prevails and that the rights of the people are not only protected but are also promoted, because it's an anomaly when you see the leadership living in opulence, and the majority of the populace living in abject poverty, and even in that context they keep having their rights violated increasingly on an ongoing basis just because the leadership wants to ensure that they remain perpetually subjugated. That is certainly not where Africa should be in the 21st century, and we hope that the work and also challenges around the closing civic space, because you find that many member states find CSOs as opponents, essentially because they're trying to advance the narrative that ensures that the rights of the downtrodden, get on the front burner of national discourse and are given appropriate recognition, promoted and protected, and that then puts us in conflict, with the leadership in many of our member states of the AU, which is certainly not a healthy development. And so you find what is now the predominant narrative of the closing of the civic space, which again is certainly not right, but we're hoping that good wisdom would prevail and they would see a need to see this as a mutually beneficial symbiosis relationship where that is mutually engaging, and then where the rights of the people is what should prevail at the end of the day.